Rain in Charlotte does not fall so much as it presses down heavy and cold, like the sky is trying to push you into the pavement. That night it felt personal. I remember standing at the edge of our driveway with my shoes soaked through my hair stuck to my face, and the email from my manager still glowing on my phone. "We appreciate your time here, but we have decided to move in a different direction." It kept replaying in my head as if rereading it would somehow change the words. It never did. I did not want to go inside. I stood there for nearly a full minute staring at the yellow glow in the living room window, listening to the muffled sound of the television. Dad always watched the same news channel volume too loud, recliner tilted back like a throne. Kyle's room was upstairs, lights flashing through the blinds. He was probably gaming with his headset on, yelling at strangers the way he always did. Mom would be in the kitchen. She cooked every night, even though Kyle always complained and Dad barely noticed. Maybe I could hide the truth. Maybe I could smile and pretend everything was fine. I used to be good at that, but tonight my chest felt tight and lying felt heavier than the rain. I opened the door. The warmth hit me first, the kind of stale heat that comes from too many bodies and not enough space. Dad did not look at me right away. He only glanced when the door shut. His eyes flicked over me like he already knew something was wrong. "You are late," he said without taking his eyes off the TV. I did not bother taking off my coat. I just stood there dripping onto the floor. "I lost my job," I said. The words felt flat. No room for explanation. No room for excuses. Dad slowly placed his beer down and sat forward. "What did you just say?" Kyle paused his game upstairs. I could hear the sudden quiet in his headset. My mother turned off the stove, the click of the knob louder than it should have been. "I said I lost my job." Dad stood. The recliner snapped upright as if even it was offended. "Why do you always do this?" he said. "Why do you always embarrass this family?" I did not answer. There was nothing to answer. Mom stepped out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her eyebrows pulled together, but she did not ask if I was all right. She only asked one thing. "What about Kyle's exam fees next month?" "You said you would cover those." Kyle came halfway down the stairs, leaning on the railing. "She always screws things up," he said. "You should not have counted on her." I swallowed hard, fighting the sting in my eyes. I cannot help him anymore. Not right now. Dad's face changed in an instant. I saw it in his shoulders first, the way they tightened. Then the anger rose sharp and violent, and before I could step back, his hand came across my face with a sound that cracked through the living room. It was not a punch. It was a slap born of frustration and disappointment and every unspoken thing he had held against me. It stung hot and bright. My vision blurred and I stumbled sideways into the doorframe. The air felt thin. My heartbeat thudded inside my ears. Mom did not gasp. She did not run to check on me. Instead, she grabbed the front door again and pulled it open. "Get out," she said, her voice steady. "Kyle needs peace before his finals. Do not bring your failure into this house tonight." She reached for my suitcase, the one I kept ready in case I needed to leave for work trips. She dragged it across the floor and shoved it through the doorway right into the rain. It hit the porch with a heavy thud. Movement caught my eye. Mrs. Turner, our next-door neighbor, was standing on her porch holding her dog's leash. She froze when she saw me stumble out, her mouth parting slightly. I knew she had seen the slap through the window. Humiliation slid over me like a second layer of rain. Kyle pushed the curtain aside with 2 fingers and smirked. "Told you. She ruins everything." My shoulder ached from the impact. My cheek throbbed. Water soaked through my coat and shirt within seconds. I picked up my suitcase, though my hands trembled. The door slammed shut. The porch light blinked off. Their voices faded behind the wood as if I had never belonged there at all. I stood alone in the rain, cold and shaking, but the fear slipped away piece by piece. In its place came something sharper, something steadier, a clarity I had never felt before. They wanted me gone. Fine, but they would choke on regret, not by fate, by me. I wish I could tell you that the night they threw me out was the moment everything shattered, but the truth is simpler and sadder. That night was not the beginning. It was only the point where every quiet fracture from the past finally split open. The signs had always been there, small and sharp, scattered across my childhood like broken glass that I kept stepping on because I was too used to bleeding to notice it anymore. Growing up, Kyle was the center of our house, the sun, everything else revolved around. If he coughed, Mom rushed to get medicine. If he scraped his knee, Dad canceled plans so he could take him for ice cream. When I got sick, I stayed home alone with a cup of microwaved soup and a note on the counter that said, "We will check on you later." Later never came. It was not that they hated me. It was worse. They simply never saw me unless they needed something. I was the built-in babysitter, the extra pair of hands, the convenient wallet once I was old enough to work. When I was 16, I got a job at a grocery store bagging produce and pushing carts in 90-degree heat. I remember coming home sweaty and tired, and Mom handed me Kyle's basketball team dues without looking up from her phone. "It is only $50, she said. "You know your brother needs this." So I paid it. I paid for a lot of things over the years. His school trips, his club fees, his cracked phone screen when he tossed it in anger and blamed me for distracting him. Every time I thought it could not get worse, they found a new way to remind me that my purpose was to support Kyle. Mom loved saying that I was the strong one. "You are independent," she would say. "Kyle needs more help. You are his role model." But strong was just a nicer word for neglected, and role model was just another word for servant. By the time I got my first full-time job at 24, it was understood that part of my paycheck went to Kyle. Dad framed it as family responsibility. "You know he is going places. He just needs a little help getting started." What they meant was that he needed my money because they did not want to spend theirs on him. Kyle never thanked me. He treated the support like something he deserved by birthright. When he wrecked the old Chevy in the driveway because he was texting Dad, stormed into my room and demanded to know why I had not taken the keys from him earlier. I was at work. It did not matter. I should have known. I should have prevented it. Everything somehow was my fault. There were countless little moments like that. Nights when I cooked dinner and Dad praised Kyle for heating up the rolls. Days when Kyle skipped class and Dad blamed me for not waking him up even though I had left for work hours earlier. Weeks when Kyle stayed unemployed, and Mom insisted he was just figuring out his path while she criticized me for switching departments at work as if ambition was a flaw. And then, there were the words she loved to repeat, the ones that carved into me so deeply I still hear them sometimes. "You are the strong one. Kyle needs more help." It was supposed to sound loving. Instead, it was a sentence that kept me chained to a role I did not choose. Their golden child. Their precious son, their future. I was just the safety net, the background character keeping everything functioning while they applauded him for breathing. There were moments when I thought it might change. When I got a promotion once I came home hopeful that they might be proud. Dad barely nodded. Mom asked how much more I would be making and whether that meant Kyle could take a prep course for his firefighter entry exam. Kyle said he deserved it because I would not have gotten anywhere without him inspiring me. I remember laughing a little, thinking he was joking. He was not. That was the kind of household we lived in, a place where absurdity became normal and unfairness became tradition. So when Dad slapped me the night I lost my job, it hurt, but it did not surprise me. When Mom dragged my suitcase to the porch and ordered me out so Kyle could have peace before finals, it stung, but it felt like something they had been preparing to do for years. What did surprise me, though, was the clarity I felt afterward. Standing in the rain with my cheek burning, I looked at that house, the same house where I had swallowed every insult and forgone every celebration for Kyle's sake, and something shifted in me. I realized I had never belonged there. Not really. I had always been the outsider in my own family, tolerated only as long as I provided something they wanted. Money, stability, silence. The moment I could no longer give them those things, they tossed me aside like clutter. It was supposed to break me. It almost did. But as I replayed every memory, every slight, every whispered complaint about me not doing enough, anger replaced grief. Not loud anger. Not the kind that lashes out recklessly. This was cold, steady, precise. The kind that sharpens a person. The kind that builds resolve. I realized they had trained me for this without knowing it. Every sacrifice I made for Kyle, every responsibility they dumped on me, every emotional burden they forced me to carry had taught me to endure. and endurance is a dangerous skill in the hands of someone who has finally stopped trying to be loved. I walked away from that house with one truth settling in my chest. They had never treated me like family, but I would make them remember me, not as their servant or their scapegoat, as the storm they never saw coming. The first night after they threw me out, I slept on my friend Jenna's lumpy sofa, staring up at her cracked popcorn ceiling while the faint hum of her old refrigerator buzzed through the apartment. I did not sleep much. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw Dad's hand rising, heard the crack of the slap, felt the burn that spread across my cheek and down into my chest. I kept replaying the moment Mom shoved my suitcase out the door and said, "Kyle needs peace," like my existence was conflict. It was strange how humiliation could cling to your skin even after the rain washed everything else away. Jenna had given me one of her oversized t-shirts to sleep in, and she pretended not to notice how badly my hands were shaking as I held the warm cup of tea she placed in front of me. She did not ask questions that night. She just placed a blanket over me, squeezed my shoulder gently, and whispered, "Get some rest," before heading to her room. I lay there listening to her door close, feeling both grateful and hollow. The next morning, my cheek was still tender. My shoulder ached from the door frame, and my pride felt like someone had peeled it off layer by layer. I showered in Jenna's tiny bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My face looked like mine, but different somehow, like the woman looking back had finally understood something the younger version of me had ignored for years. I stepped out into the hallway and saw Jenna already dressed for her shift at the coffee shop. She offered me a soft smile and a granola bar. "I packed you two," she said. "You will need them." I thanked her with a voice that sounded too small. After she left, I sat alone with my suitcase beside the sofa, scrolling through job listings with a sinking heart. Everything required experience I did not have or certifications I was not sure I could afford. My inbox was a pile of rejection emails. I sent out more resumes anyway, each one feeling like a message in a bottle tossed into the ocean. By noon, I walked to the nearest employment center. Rainwater from the previous night left the sidewalks slick, and every step felt heavier than it should have. While I waited for my number to be called, Kyle texted me. "We need you to send $600 for my exam fees. Dad said you are responsible for this." The nerve of him left me breathless. I stared at the message for a long time, then typed, "I am sleeping on a sofa. I lost my job. I cannot cover anything." The response came instantly. "Not my problem. You owe us. I owe them." The words echoed in my head until they twisted into something sharp. "I owe you nothing," I typed back, but then deleted it. I was not ready for that fight yet. Not then. A woman finally called my number. She skimmed my resume with a polite frown and told me the same thing everyone else did. "We will keep your information on file." By the time I stepped back outside, the sky was gray again, heavy with leftover storm clouds. I checked my phone, hoping maybe Mom had reached out to see if I was safe. Nothing, but there was a new post on Facebook. A picture of Kyle at the dining table, smiling with a plate of food in front of him. The caption said, "Family dinner." So blessed. It felt like a slap sharper than the one Dad had given me. I walked slowly back toward Jenna's apartment, hugging my jacket around me. About halfway there, I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Mrs. Turner from next door, standing on the sidewalk with her little dog wrapped in a raincoat. She approached me with hesitation, her eyes scanning my cheek. "Honey," she said softly, "I saw what happened. I did not know what to say." Words jammed in my throat. She reached into her tote bag and pulled out a clean towel. "You are still a bit damp," she said. "Here, dry off before you catch a cold." Her kindness nearly broke me. I felt my eyes sting, but I blinked the tears back. "Thank you," I whispered. She touched my arm gently. "You deserved better than that. Do not let them convince you otherwise." Something inside me steadied at her words. I nodded, unable to speak. When I reached Jenna's apartment again, the air felt too quiet. I dropped onto the sofa and wrapped the towel around my shoulders, even though my hair was already dry. My phone buzzed. This time it was my mother. I swiped it open, hoping foolishly that she might apologize or at least ask where I was. Instead, she sent a single line. "Do not come back until you have yourself together. Kyle needs a calm environment." My jaw tightened so hard it hurt. I stared at her message, then at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. I looked exhausted, but under the exhaustion something else flickered. Anger. Resolve. By evening, Jenna returned home with takeout for us. She asked gently if I wanted to talk about it. I shook my head at first, but the silence between us felt too heavy. Eventually, everything spilled out. The slap, the rain, the suitcase, the way they had always treated me like an accessory to Kyle's life. Jenna listened without interrupting, tears building in her eyes the more I spoke. When I finished, she squeezed my hand. "You did not deserve any of that," she said, "not one bit." I felt another crack inside me, but this one did not hurt. It was the kind of crack sunlight comes through. Later that night, while Jenna slept, I lay awake again on the sofa. I thought about the years I spent bending myself into the shape they needed, the jobs I took, the money I gave, the emotional weight I carried. And now, here I was, jobless, abandoned, humiliated, and expected to pay for Kyle's future, like I was nothing more than a walking wallet. Something shifted in me then. A small but unmistakable spark. I was tired of being useful only when they needed something. Tired of being invisible. Tired of being blamed. I decided right there on Jenna's sofa with the street lamp casting pale light through the blinds that I would never crawl back to that house again. And someday they would understand the cost of throwing me away. 2 days after I moved onto Jenna's sofa, the numbness finally wore off. In its place came a quiet heaviness that settled under my ribs and refused to move. I spent the morning sending out more resumes, combing through job sites until the listings all blurred together. The apartment was silent except for the distant rumble of traffic outside and the occasional creak of old pipes in the walls. My shoulder still ached from where I hit the doorframe. Every time I reached for my coffee mug, the muscle tugged in a sharp reminder of the night they pushed me out. Around noon, Jenna left for her shift and told me to help myself to anything in the pantry. I thanked her and tried to smile, but even that felt unfamiliar. I sat on the sofa with my laptop open, but my mind kept drifting back to my parents' living room, to Kyle coming down the stairs with that smug tilt to his head, to the way Mom's voice stayed cold as she ordered me out of the house. I kept telling myself it was their loss, not mine, but grief and humiliation have a way of twisting everything. I pushed those thoughts away and focused on writing a cover letter. I was halfway through explaining why I would be a good fit for an office assistant position when my phone buzzed. I expected a spam call or another rejection email. Instead, I saw Kyle's name. For a moment, I almost ignored it, but something inside me hardened. I swiped to answer. "What do you want, Kyle?" There was no greeting on his end, just that tone he always used with me. A mix of entitlement and irritation. "We need you to send $600 by Friday," he said. "Dad said you promised to cover my exam fees." I let out a humorless breath. "Kyle, I lost my job. I told you already. I am sleeping on a sofa. I cannot pay $600, not now." His sigh crackled through the speaker like I was inconveniencing him. "Not my problem. Dad said you owe us. Owe us." The words hit me harder than the slap had. I sat up straighter, the anger rising so fast and hot it almost startled me. "I owe you nothing," I said quietly. "Nothing." Kyle scoffed. "You always make things dramatic. If you had not screwed up and lost your job, we would not be dealing with this. You need to fix what you caused." I blinked. "What I caused? You think losing my job was something I did to you?" He did not hesitate. "Obviously, if you are not paying for the exam, who is supposed to? You know Mom and Dad cannot afford it. You have always been the one who helps. That is your role." My role. The room felt smaller suddenly, like the walls had moved closer. I stared at the blank television screen across from me and saw my reflection faintly. I looked exhausted, sad, tired of bending myself into whatever shape they needed. That version of me was fading. Kyle's voice cut back in impatient and sharp. "Look," he said, "just figure it out. We need the money." "Friday." Then he hung up. No goodbye. No concern for where I was sleeping. No question about how I was surviving. Just a demand. Just the reminder that in their eyes I existed for their convenience. I sat there for a long moment staring at the phone still glowing in my hand. Something inside me shifted. It was not a snap or a break. It was quieter, more controlled, like a door slowly closing after years of rattling open on loose hinges. I set the phone down carefully on the coffee table and leaned back against the sofa. I thought about every time I had rearranged my life for Kyle, every early morning shift I had taken to cover his fees, every time I kept quiet. When Dad insulted me, every moment I swallowed anger so they could stay comfortable. And for what? So that the moment I faltered, they could throw me out like trash, so that Kyle could call and demand money while I was still wiping rainwater off my suitcase, so that Dad could blame me for losing a job he never supported me in. I did not cry. I did not shake. I did not crumble. I felt a clarity I had never known. They believed I would always come back. They believed I would always help. They believed I would swallow anything to keep the peace. But something had changed the night Dad's hand came across my face. Something had changed when I stood outside in the rain and saw my neighbor witnessing my humiliation. Something had changed when Kyle told me I owed them. I stood up and paced the living room. My shoulder throbbed, but the pain only sharpened my thoughts. I realized that my entire life had been shaped by guilt and obligation. They had taught me to feel responsible for everyone except myself. That lesson ended now. I picked up my phone again and scrolled through old messages. Every request for money, every guilt trip, every moment they dismissed me. I opened the folder in my email where I kept financial records and receipts. I saw the transfers, the payments, the times I saved Kyle from overdraft fees. I had proof of all of it. They had always underestimated me. They thought my silence meant weakness. They thought my loyalty meant obedience. They did not understand what silence becomes once it stops serving the people who demand it. It becomes strategy. It becomes preparation. I sat back down and whispered the words out loud just to hear them in the air. You want war? Fine. I needed to find a job. I needed stability. I needed strength. And once I had those things, I would make them understand the price of pushing me out. The phone call that was meant to break me had done something far more dangerous. It had focused me. I looked out the apartment window at the gray sky over Charlotte and felt something new settle inside me. Not hope, not forgiveness, purpose. The first step toward revenge did not feel like a dramatic turning point. It felt quiet, almost ordinary. It started the same way most necessary things do, with a deep breath and a decision made in silence. Jenna had left for her shift again, and I sat alone in the apartment, surrounded by the low hum of the refrigerator and the muted city noise seeping through the window. My shoulder still ached, but the bruise was fading. The pain was manageable now, almost useful. Every throb reminded me of what they had done, of why I could not go back. I opened my laptop and pulled up my financial records. For years, I had treated these documents like simple receipts, like proof of responsibility. But now, as the folders opened one by one, I saw them for what they really were. Evidence. There were transfers to Kyle labeled exam fund or loan payback that he never repaid. There were emergency payments for his broken phone, his car repairs, his overdue class fees. Hundreds and hundreds of dollars flowing from me to him, always with the same explanation from my parents. You are the strong one. You can handle it. I scrolled through bank statements that showed my balance dipping dangerously low just so he could have new shoes or another prep test. The pattern was painfully obvious. Kyle took. My parents demanded. I gave. Not because I wanted to, but because they had built my identity around being the helper, the one who carried the weight. I stopped scrolling and leaned back. For the first time in years, I saw the whole picture clearly, and they never expected me to look. I opened another folder on my laptop. This one contained messages I had archived over time. I reread texts full of entitlement disguised as family duty. Send 200. Kyle needs his books. You said you would cover this. It is your responsibility. There were guilt trips from Mom. Kyle is under so much pressure. You should support him. You know how sensitive he is. And there were dismissive remarks from Dad. Do not argue. Just help your brother. He will return the favor when he gets on his feet. He never did. He never even pretended to try. I had screenshots of Kyle ranting at me for not transferring money quickly enough. Screenshots of Dad blaming me for Kyle's failures. Screenshots of Mom insisting I was selfish when I hesitated to cover another fee. My fingers curled slowly into a fist. They had handed me their weapon without realizing it. They had documented their own exploitation of me. All I had to do was organize it. I created a new folder on my laptop titled For Later. Inside it, I arranged everything neatly. Bank statements in chronological order, screenshots labeled by date, notes describing each incident. It was almost therapeutic sorting years of mistreatment into tidy digital files. What used to be pain became data. What used to be guilt became clarity. My heart beat steadily as I worked not fast from fear, but slow with purpose. Kyle's voice echoed in my mind. Dad said you owe us. I shook my head. Not anymore. When the folder was finished, I backed it up to the cloud. Twice. Then I emailed copies to myself under coded subjects so no one could accidentally open them. After that, I reached out to someone I had avoided for years. My old coworker, Mark. We had worked together at the bank before I changed jobs. We had been friendly in a quiet, understated way. He respected confidentiality, and more importantly, he could access information I needed. I hesitated before calling him, but when he answered with his familiar calm voice, some of the tension in my chest eased. I explained that I needed help checking whether someone had opened a loan application under my name. I did not mention Kyle yet. I did not want pity. I did not want shock. I wanted facts. Mark agreed to look into it. He knew the system well enough to navigate it without raising alarms. After we hung up, I held the phone for several seconds, feeling the weight of what might come next. If Kyle had used my identity for anything beyond the exam fees, it would not just be manipulation, it would be fraud. And in America, fraud leaves scars that do not fade easily. I paced the apartment while waiting for Mark to call back. My shoulder twinged, but it no longer weakened me. It fueled me. I thought about my parents and how desperately they cared about appearances. To the outside world, we were a normal family. They posted pictures of holiday dinners and backyard barbecues. They boasted about Kyle's potential and how proud they were of his dedication. If anyone knew the truth, if anyone saw the way they drained me dry behind closed doors, their crafted image would crumble. And they feared that more than anything. The apartment felt smaller the longer I waited, but eventually my phone buzzed. It was Mark. His voice was careful when he spoke. You were right to check, he said. Someone tried to open a small private loan under your name last month. Denied, but still attempted. My stomach tightened. Is there a name attached? There was a pause. Then he read the applicant's name. Kyle Thompson. I closed my eyes. My brother had crossed a line he could not talk his way out of. They threw me out when I lost my job, yet Kyle had tried to borrow money in my name without even asking me. They were counting on the idea that I would never fight back. They believed that no matter what they did, I would absorb the blow, just like I always had. That version of me no longer existed. Thank you, I told Mark. He asked if I was all right. I said yes. It was a lie, but a useful one. After hanging up, I stared at the wall for a long moment. The air in the apartment felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. Revenge did not have to be violent. It did not even have to be loud. It only had to be true. They thought I was powerless without them. What they did not realize was that power shifts quietly. And mine had just come back to me. I opened the folder titled For Later and looked at everything I had gathered. This was only the beginning. Starting over sounds romantic when people talk about it in motivational speeches, but in reality, it is mostly paperwork exhaustion and quiet fear wrapped in determination. My new life began in the smallest, most unglamorous ways. I found a room for rent in a narrow townhouse on the east side of Charlotte, owned by a retired nurse named Linda who preferred early mornings' quiet tenants and instant coffee. The place smelled faintly of lavender and disinfectant, and for the first time in years, nobody expected anything from me. Not money, not emotional labor, not my silence. Just respect for shared walls and timely rent. The room was small, barely large enough for a bed, a desk, and a lamp, but the moment I set my suitcase down, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Safety. I started my new job a week later. It was not impressive. A clerical position in a logistics company, sorting orders, answering phones, sending routine emails. But it was steady. It was mine. And no one there knew me as the girl who paid her brother's way through life. No one there saw me as the strong one. They simply saw me as a new coworker learning the ropes. The office had humming fluorescent lights that sometimes flickered, and the break room fridge always smelled vaguely like old tuna, but the people were kind in the ordinary ways that mattered. One coworker held the door for me each morning. Another left sticky notes reminding me of small tasks. My supervisor, a woman with sharp reading glasses and an impossibly calm demeanor, told me I was catching on fast. It was simple, gentle humanity. It was more than my own family had given me in years. My shoulder still hurt when I reached too far or lifted anything heavier than a binder. After 2 days of trying to ignore it, I made an appointment at an urgent care clinic using Jenna's recommendation. It was bright cold and smelled like rubbing alcohol. The doctor touched my shoulder lightly, then ordered an X-ray. The technician asked if the injury happened at work. I hesitated for half a breath and simply shook my head. When the results came back, the doctor explained that I had a deep bruise, nothing broken, but the impact had been strong. He gave me a printout that included the imaging notes recommended rest and wrote a brief summary describing trauma from blunt impact. I tucked that paper into my bag like a shield. Evidence. Something my father could not deny. Something Kyle could not twist. Something my mother could not gaslight into oblivion. After work each night, I returned to my small room and sat at the desk organizing my growing collection of documents. Financial records, screenshots, text messages, Mark's confirmation about the attempted loan, and now medical proof. It was all there, forming a story that they never imagined would be written. I read articles about tenant law, personal finance, and identity fraud. I learned how to request a credit freeze, how to dispute suspicious inquiries, and how to protect myself legally. I also learned the basic steps required to file a report for attempted identity theft. The more I read, the angrier I felt, but unlike before, the anger did not consume me. It sharpened me. I had spent my entire life bending under the weight of responsibility they placed on me. Now I was finally learning to stand upright. One night, as I sat at the small desk sorting files and scanning documents, Linda knocked lightly on my door. She held 2 mugs of steaming instant coffee and handed one to me. "You are settling in well," she said in her soft Carolina accent. I nodded, trying to. She studied me for a moment, her eyes lingering on the faint yellow shadow along my cheekbone. She did not ask. Instead, she said, "I am glad you are here. We all deserve a quiet place to breathe." After she left, I stared at the mug in my hands. For years, any conversation with a parental figure came with judgment, disappointment, or expectation. Linda's simple kindness felt like something foreign, something grounding. As the weeks passed, my days slowly fell into rhythm. Work, dinner, organizing evidence, sleep, repeat. It might have been monotonous, but it was also healing. The mental fog I had carried for so long began to lift. I could think clearly again, not through the lens of fear or obligation, but through logic. Strategy. Resolve. My parents thought throwing me out would weaken me. Kyle thought withholding affection or demanding money would keep me tethered to them. They had no idea they had pushed me into a world where I could rebuild myself without their interference. They had forgotten that people grow stronger when they stop carrying others. One Friday evening after finishing a long shift, I sat on my bed scrolling through job listings again. Not to escape my current work, but because I wanted more than just survival. I wanted options. Power comes from choice, and I wanted enough choices to never be trapped again. Then, almost without thinking, I opened the folder labeled "For Later." Everything was still there, clean, organized, ready. My parents had depended for years on the idea that I would never stand up to them. Kyle had depended on the idea that I would always put him first, but now I had stability. I had privacy. I had evidence. Most importantly, I had time. Revenge did not need to be loud. It just needed to be final. I closed my laptop and leaned back against the wall, letting the quiet fill the room. My new life was still small, still fragile, still finding its shape, but it was mine. And with each passing day, the balance shifted a little more. They had built their world on my sacrifices. They had built Kyle's future on my back. They had taken me for granted until they tossed me out in the rain. They believed they had broken me. Instead, they had freed me. I whispered into the stillness of my room, as much a promise to myself as a warning to them. I am not done. 3 weeks passed before I heard from my mother again. By then, my life had settled into a rhythm that felt steady enough to trust. I woke early for work, brewed cheap coffee in the communal kitchen, exchanged polite morning nods with Linda, and walked to the bus stop with a sense of direction I had not felt in years. My cheek was healed. My shoulder no longer throbbed each time I reached for something. And most importantly, the fog inside me had cleared. I could think without flinching at memories. I could breathe without fear of another demand appearing on my phone. So when her name lit up my screen late on a Tuesday afternoon, I nearly ignored it. The call lasted only 5 seconds. She hung up before I could answer, a classic tactic of hers. A warning shot meant to unsettle me. A few minutes later, a message arrived. Family dinner tomorrow night. Your aunts and uncles are coming. You need to be here. No apology, no acknowledgement of what happened, not even a greeting, just an order, a command. I stared at the message, feeling an old instinct twitch inside me, the instinct to obey, to keep the peace, to show up even when my presence was only ever used as proof that we were a normal family. That instinct had ruled my life for years, but now it felt foreign, weak, expired. I typed a response. Why? She replied almost instantly. Kyle has news to share. Your brother is advancing in the firefighter training program. We want the whole family present. There it was, the truth behind her sudden interest. Not concern for me, not an attempt to repair anything. Just another opportunity to brag about Kyle. Another gathering where I would be cast as the unremarkable supporting character in his ever-expanding spotlight. I set my phone down and tried to focus on my work, but the message gnawed at me. Not because I wanted to go, but because something about it felt calculated. My parents were not the type to invite me back out of kindness. They wanted something. They always did. That night, I sat at the small desk in my room and opened the folder labeled For Later. Evidence, proof, power. As I scrolled through it, a slow realization seeped into me. This dinner could be an opportunity, not for revenge yet, but for reconnaissance, observation, understanding weaknesses. They thought I was the same person they pushed out into the rain. They thought I would show up with guilt clinging to my clothes and desperation in my eyes. They thought I would be grateful simply to be included again. They had no idea who I was becoming. I closed the laptop and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. My heart beat steadily. No fear, no panic, only cold, deliberate thought. I decided I would go, not to reconcile, not to apologize, not to fall back into my old role, but to watch them, to see what they wanted, to gather more truth. Revenge thrives on information, and they were foolish enough to invite me back into the house where all their secrets were kept. The next evening, I arrived on foot. I could have taken a bus, but I wanted time to prepare myself mentally. The walk was long, winding through quiet neighborhoods and past houses with trimmed lawns and porch lights already glowing. My parents' house came into view just as the sun dipped behind the trees. I paused at the end of the driveway. The last time I had stood there, rain had soaked through my coat and humiliation had pressed down on me like another storm cloud. Tonight, the sky was clear. I walked up the porch steps and knocked. My mother opened the door almost immediately. She looked at me the way someone looks at a stranger who vaguely resembles a relative. Her smile was type-polished for company. There you are. Try to look more put together. Everyone is already inside. She turned and walked away before I could respond. I stepped inside. The house smelled like roasted chicken and garlic bread. Laughter drifted from the dining room. My father stood at the head of the table, retelling some exaggerated story to a couple of uncles. Kyle sat beside him wearing his firefighter candidate shirt like a trophy. When he saw me, he smirked. About time, he said loudly. I thought you got lost on your way from whatever couch you are crashing on. A few relatives glanced at me with polite confusion. My mother cleared her throat and said she is fine, then changed the subject quickly. No one asked where I had been. No one asked why my parents looked uneasy when they mentioned me. They simply accepted the narrative my parents always gave. Kyle, the promising future. Me, the difficult background character. I took a seat near the end of the table. I listened. I watched. I kept my face still while inside I cataloged everything. The way Kyle bragged about training. The way my father nodded proudly at every lie. The way my mother kept glancing at me as if waiting for me to embarrass her. And then I saw it. Kyle pulled out paperwork from a folder to show the family. Among the pages, I recognized something instantly. A tuition invoice. My name printed faintly at the bottom. They had used my information again, even after throwing me out, even after refusing to check on me, even after everything. My heartbeat stayed steady. No one noticed the way my fingers tightened around my glass of water. My mother beamed at the relatives. "We are so proud of him," she said. "It has been a family effort. Family effort." The words rang like a challenge. I lifted my chin slightly and forced a small smile. I ate. I drank. I laughed quietly when appropriate. And the entire time a single truth solidified inside me. They thought tonight would remind me of my place. They thought guilt and shame would pull me back into orbit. They thought I would see their unity and long to be part of it again. But all I saw was weakness, cracks, lies, vulnerabilities waiting to be exposed. When dinner ended, Kyle slapped my back as he passed. "You should be honored. You are part of my success." I looked him in the eye and smiled in a way he had never seen from me. "Oh, I know." And something in my voice made him pause. He would not understand until much later, but by then it would be too late. The dining room felt smaller once the dishes were cleared away, like the walls had subtly shifted inward to trap me in the role they expected me to play. The overhead lights cast a warm glow across the table, but nothing about the atmosphere felt warm. It felt staged, controlled, prepared for a performance that I already knew would feature Kyle as the hero and me as the convenient cautionary tale. My mother began the show with a familiar tone, syrupy sweet yet laced with superiority. "We are just so proud of Kyle," she said, standing behind him like a pageant mom. "He has worked so hard." Her eyes flicked to me for half a second, sharp and assessing, waiting for my reaction. I kept my expression blank. My father cleared his throat loudly as though announcing a proclamation. "Unlike some people who cannot keep a job," he said, raising his glass, "Kyle has discipline, drive, ambition." The relatives chuckled politely, unaware of the sting behind his words. Or maybe they knew, but didn't care. My mother joined in with a laugh that felt rehearsed. "Oh, Harold," she scolded lightly, then added, "But you are right. Kyle has always been our strong one." I felt several pairs of eyes shift toward me, their looks soft with pity or sharp with judgment. No one defended me. No one questioned whether this public comparison was cruel or unnecessary. This was normal for them, expected, tradition. Kyle leaned back in his chair, lifting his chin proudly. "You know," he said loudly enough for the entire table to pause their conversations, "some people just are not cut out for real responsibility." I glanced at him. He smirked in return. "You remember when she almost made me late for my exam because she could not get up on time?" He continued, gesturing toward me as though I were an amusing footnote in his origin story. "She is always messing things up." A few relatives laughed, not because the story was funny, but because mocking me had always been socially acceptable in this family. My aunt spoke next, her voice dripping sympathy that felt performative rather than genuine. "So, you lost your job, dear. That is such a shame. Such a tough time to be unstable." Another relative nodded sympathetically. "Maybe it's a sign to settle down, you know. Find a nice stable role. Not everyone is meant for big careers." The implication was blatant. Kyle is meant for greatness. I am meant for scraps. If I had walked in here without the emotional armor I had built over the past weeks, their words might have gutted me. But now they slid off like dull blades. Painful, yes, but harmless in their impotence. My mother gestured toward a tray of dessert. "Go ahead, Kimberly. You can serve everyone. You always used to do that so well." The room quieted slightly. It was not a request. It was a command disguised as nostalgia. I looked at her. My face calm, my voice steady. I'm not serving. She blinked at me, thrown off balance. The silence sharpened. Someone coughed. My father let out a slow, annoyed breath like a man preparing to discipline a child. This is why she cannot hold a job, he muttered. No respect, no sense of duty. Kyle chimed in again, enjoying the show. You are embarrassing yourself, sis. Just get the cake and stop making everything about you. My mother waved her hand dismissively. She has always been dramatic. It is exhausting. The conversation resumed, but the energy had shifted. It was subtle, but I could feel it. Their confidence crackled with uncertainty, like they were suddenly aware that I was no longer responding with predictable submission. Still, they pushed on. Kyle slid a thick envelope onto the table, smiling proudly. These are my academy documents for next quarter. Instructor evaluations, schedules, tuition paperwork. He paused, tapped the envelope, and looked directly at me. And forms for the financial aid. You'll need to fill out your part by tomorrow. My stomach clenched. My part. He said it as though it were an obligation etched into law. My mother added breezily, We told the academy you would support him. You know how these programs are. They need proof of family contribution. You always helped before. My father nodded as though this were perfectly logical. Family sacrifices for each other, especially the older child. You know that. Older child, not daughter, not person. Just the designated mule. I stared at the envelope. The edge of a form peeked out, and even from that glimpse I recognized my own name typed faintly at the bottom of one page. They had already filled out parts of it. They had already signed my name on sections requiring financial responsibility. My scalp tingled with a cold rush of anger. My chest tightened. My hands curled into fists beneath the table, hidden by the tablecloth. Kyle smirked, tapping the envelope again. Consider it your way of contributing. You know, since you are not doing much else right now. A flicker of laughter moved around the table like static. Nobody questioned the legality. Nobody questioned the morality. They did not care whether it was right. They only cared that Kyle needed something, and I existed. My father leaned forward, voice low and authoritative. You will handle it tonight. No more excuses. You are not a child anymore. Do what is expected. I looked at each of their faces one by one. My father's smug confidence. My mother's entitled impatience. My aunt's forced sympathy. Kyle's mocking certainty. Every expression told the same story. They believed they owned me. They believed throwing me out had not changed anything. They believed I would always return to heel when called. I lifted my glass, took a slow sip, set it down with quiet precision, and spoke with a calmness that chilled even me. No. Kyle's smirk faltered. My mother blinked. My father straightened, confused. Excuse me, he said. No, I repeated. I'm not signing anything. I'm not paying anything. And I am not part of whatever fantasy you have built around Kyle's future. The quiet that followed was deep, uncomfortable, heavy. Then Kyle burst out laughing. You cannot be serious. I looked at him and said in a voice as sharp as the edge of a blade, Watch me. His laughter died instantly. And for the first time in his life, Kyle looked at me not with arrogance, not with condescension, but with something close to fear. I left my parents' house that night without looking back. The air outside was cold and sharp, but it felt cleaner than anything inside those walls. My footsteps echoed down the driveway, steady and unhurried, while behind me I could hear my mother snapping at Kyle, my father cursing under his breath, chairs scraping against the floor. Their little kingdom had cracked, even if they did not understand the extent of the damage yet. I walked until their voices disappeared completely, swallowed by the quiet of the neighborhood. The street lamps cast long shadows across the pavement, and for a moment I let myself stand there and breathe. Not in relief, but in clarity. They had shown me exactly who they were. They had shown me exactly what they valued, and most importantly, they had shown me exactly where their vulnerabilities lay. When I reached my small rented room, I did not sit down. I did not pace. I did not cry or shake or collapse the way the old version of me would have. I went straight to my laptop, opened the folder labeled For Later, and began building something new. something careful, something deadly. First, I sorted every financial document I had ever been forced to handle for Kyle, bank transfers I made for his tuition, screenshots of my parents demanding money I did not have, messages from Kyle asking for loan extensions with no intention of paying me back, old emails showing I was listed as an emergency contact, a sponsor, even an unofficial guarantor on things I had never agreed to. I filtered everything by date. I created subfolders. I labeled each file meticulously. Patterns emerged, patterns that painted a clear picture of exploitation disguised as family duty. Patterns that showed I had supported Kyle financially for years while he contributed nothing. Patterns that revealed fraud at its core. They thought they had hidden everything beneath shame. But shame evaporates when replaced by purpose. Next, I opened the audio file I had recorded after leaving the dinner. I had not intended to capture anything, but my phone had picked up my father's raised voice calling me ungrateful, insisting Kyle came first, stating outright that they expected me to pay for his next academy deadline. His tone was cold, entitled. It was evidence they would not be able to talk their way around. I replayed pieces of it, listening to the contempt dripping from every syllable. Not emotional abuse in the way a court would recognize, not enough for police intervention, but enough to destroy their public image, enough to expose them for what they were: users, manipulators, and cowards. Then I pulled up the photos the neighbor had taken the night I was thrown out, the rain falling, the shock on my face, the red imprint of my father's hand along my jaw, my mother shoving my suitcase onto the porch, Kyle leaning against the window smirking. The images were powerful without being sensational, real without being graphic. Anyone who saw them would feel something primal, something protective, something angry. After that, I began assembling the timeline. I wrote out the sequence of events starting from the moment I told them I lost my job to the night of the family dinner. I detailed how they threw me out, how they demanded money, how they forged my name on paperwork, how they bragged about Kyle while treating me like garbage. I listed dates, times, witnesses, and supporting documents. Everything had to be precise. Everything had to be irrefutable. I created a spreadsheet. I made charts. I built an outline that could be understood by a lawyer, a financial investigator, or a curious stranger scrolling online. By the time the clock struck midnight, my desk was covered in sticky notes and printed pages arranged like the early scaffolding of a case file. But I was not done. I needed expert confirmation. So the next day during my lunch break, I called the legal aid office downtown. I explained that I had evidence of unauthorized signatures and financial manipulation. I avoided dramatic phrasing and stuck to facts. The woman on the phone encouraged me to come in for a consultation. "Bring everything you have," she said. "Paper trails matter." When I arrived at her office later that week, she scrubbed through the documents with trained eyes. When she reached the forged paperwork, she sighed. "This can absolutely get them in trouble," she said, "especially if they submitted it to an institution. And if your brother used your information to secure benefits or admission, that's fraud. And fraud carries consequences." She asked whether I intended to pursue legal action. I shook my head. Not yet. Not that route. I wanted something sharper, something public, something they could not spin as misunderstanding or family drama. "I want truth," I told her. "The truth in front of everyone who thinks they're the perfect family." She nodded slowly. "You are within your rights to tell your story," she said. "As long as everything you show is factual and you do not add anything false, you are legally protected." I walked out of her office feeling lighter, not because I wanted revenge alone, but because my revenge would be grounded in the one thing they could not manipulate: reality. That night, I sat at my desk and reviewed Kyle's upcoming firefighter academy schedule. His biggest milestone was only a month away: a formal ceremony for new candidates, a perfect event with a perfect audience, family instructors, officials, neighbors, community leaders, people whose respect my parents desperately craved, people whose admiration Kyle depended on, an entire room waiting to be impressed. An entire room that would crumble the moment the truth stepped onto the stage. I began preparing the presentation. Not dramatic, not flashy, just honest. A quiet collection of facts that would detonate on impact. Screenshots, audio clips, bank statements, photos, timelines, and one final slide with the message, "This is what they built. This is what they hid. This is what they demanded from me. And this is who I became instead." I saved the file on a password-protected USB and slipped it into a small metal tin. My hands were steady. My heartbeat was calm. Revenge was no longer an impulse. It was a plan. The night before Kyle's ceremony settled over the city like a heavy blanket thick with humidity and the kind of stillness that feels staged, as though the world itself were holding its breath. My small room was dim except for the soft glow of the desk lamp pooling onto the scattered documents, the open laptop, and the metal tin holding the USB. Everything I had collected, every proof of their manipulation, lay arranged with clinical precision. But for the first time since I began planning, I was not working. I was sitting completely still, elbows on my knees, fingers laced, staring at the wall like it might speak if I waited long enough. The air was warm, buzzing faintly from the old heater, but my hands were cold. Not with fear, not exactly. It was something sharper, a strange quietness in my bones, a sense of inevitability. Tomorrow would not be a confrontation. It would be a reveal, and reveals are final. Once truth leaves your hands and becomes public, there is no undoing it. That thought settled deep in my chest like a stone. I turned toward the window. Outside, the street was washed in the amber glow of lampposts' shadows stretching across the pavement in long, trembling lines as the wind nudged the branches. I watched a stray cat sprint across the parking lot and disappear behind the trash bins, moving with a kind of frantic purpose I recognized inside myself. I wished briefly that I could pace or move or do something to diffuse the tension swelling under my skin, but there was nothing left to prepare. Every file was saved, every screenshot backed up, the audio clips labeled, the timeline finalized, the presentation polished into a blade. And for the first time, I let myself admit out loud what tomorrow meant. This ends with them losing everything I whispered. The words did not echo. They just existed in the room as quietly devastating as truth often is. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. Without permission, my mind replayed the night I was thrown out, the shock of the door slamming, the cold rain slicing across my face. My father's voice telling me I was an embarrassment. My mother choosing silence over compassion. Kyle smirking through the window like my pain was entertainment. Those memories used to suffocate me. Now they fueled me. Pain had turned into purpose and purpose into strategy. But purpose alone does not erase the hurt. I placed a hand on my cheek on the spot where my father's slap had bloomed like fire. The skin was healed, but the phantom echo remained. What surprised me was that I no longer felt broken remembering it. I felt clarity. My phone buzzed, suddenly startling me. I reached for it, expecting another one of Kyle's entitled messages, but it was a text from my neighbor Linda. "Just checking on you. You looked tired today." I smiled despite myself. Linda was one of the few people who had seen the real story. The night they threw me out, she had walked onto her porch and handed me a towel without asking questions. She had not judged, she had not lectured, she had simply been kind. I typed back, "Big day tomorrow." She replied almost instantly, "Whatever you are about to do it with your whole heart. Truth deserves to be loud sometimes." I stared at those words for a long moment. Truth deserves to be loud. They had spent years silencing me with guilt, with obligations, with comparisons. Tomorrow, the truth would speak in a room full of people whose opinions mattered to them far more than mine ever had. I placed the phone down gently, then I stood and walked toward the small mirror above the dresser. My reflection stared back at me pale from stress, eyes heavy but steady, jaw firm. I traced my fingers along my cheekbone, remembering how fragile I felt weeks ago. "You survived them," I whispered to myself. "Now let them face who you became without them." The clock on the wall ticked loudly, slicing the silence into sharp pieces. 11:52. It was technically still early, but exhaustion spread through me like a slow tide. I forced myself to lie down, pulling the thin blanket over my body. The mattress was lumpy and the springs squeaked whenever I shifted, but I had slept in worse places. At least here I was safe. My mind, however, stayed awake long after my body stilled. Thoughts darted through me like flashes of lightning. What if the projector malfunctioned? What if they tried to stop me? What if Kyle caused a scene? What if my parents pretended to be victims? What if they denied everything? For a moment, doubt crept into me like a shadow slipping beneath a locked door. But then I remembered the legal aid lawyer's words. Paper trails matter. Facts matter. And everything I carried was fact. My breathing slowed. I pictured the room tomorrow. The neat rows of chairs, the polished stage, the proud families dressed in their best clothes. And at the center of it all, Kyle, basking in the spotlight he believed he deserved. I pictured my parents smiling as though they had earned his achievements through their own suffering, as though their family were whole and honorable. And then, I pictured the moment the presentation would shift, the first screenshot flashing onto the screen, the text messages, the bank transfers, the audio clip, the photo from the rain-soaked porch. I could almost hear the gasp that would ripple through the crowd, the stunned silence, the whispers, the shame settling onto my parents like a weight they could not hide from. For once they would sit in the discomfort they had forced me to carry for years, and Kyle would fall from the pedestal they had built for him with my sacrifices. The thought settled my heartbeat. The fear dissolved. What took its place was a cold, quiet readiness. I rolled onto my side and reached for the metal tin on the nightstand, running my thumb over the cool surface. Everything I needed for justice fit inside something small enough to fit in a purse. Funny how that worked. I placed it carefully back on the table and finally allowed my eyes to close. Just before sleep pulled me under, a final thought surfaced. Tomorrow was not about revenge alone. It was about reclaiming the truth of my own story. And once truth is free, it does not return quietly. The morning of Kyle's ceremony felt too bright, too clean, too calm, as though the world had no idea what was about to unfold inside the auditorium at the Charlotte Fire Academy. I woke early, long before my alarm, and sat on the edge of my bed for a full minute, letting the quiet settle over me. My palms tingled with adrenaline. The metal tin containing the USB sat on the nightstand, gleaming softly in the morning light. It looked harmless, almost delicate, nothing like the catalyst it would become. I dressed simply, choosing a navy blouse and black slacks, clothes that would blend into a crowd without drawing attention. Today was not about me looking strong or impressive. It was about the truth speaking for itself. On the bus ride across town, families with balloons and bouquets boarded at each stop, chatting excitedly about their sons, daughters, cousins, and spouses who were completing their training. Their laughter filled the aisle. Their pride radiated through the seats. I sat quietly among them, the USB heavy in my pocket like a heartbeat. Every passing moment tightened the coil inside my stomach, but not with fear, with anticipation, with certainty, with purpose. When the bus finally pulled into the stop near the academy, a stream of families poured out onto the sidewalk, their voices melding into a warm hum. I walked with them, but slightly behind, giving myself a buffer of space. The academy building stood tall and polished, its brick exterior glowing in the sunlight. Red banners with the academy's emblem hung over the entrance, fluttering in the mild breeze. It was the kind of day perfect for celebration. Or revelation. Inside, volunteers guided guests toward the main hall. The auditorium buzzed with energy as people filled the rows of chairs. Proud parents snapped photos. Siblings joked with each other. A slideshow looped on the giant projector at the front of the room, displaying pictures of recruits during training exercises. Kyle's photo showed him posing with a fire hose, grinning like he was the chosen star of some heroic movie. I spotted my parents in the third row, dressed in their best outfits, waving at distant relatives, as though they were local celebrities. My mother's smile was wide, her energy effervescent. My father looked firm, proud, the patriarch of a family he believed was admired. Kyle stood near the stage, talking animatedly with a group of instructors. I slid into a seat toward the back, unnoticed. For a long moment, I watched them through the gaps between people. They seemed so sure, so ready, so oblivious. My father nudged my mother, saying something that made her laugh and dab her eyes with a tissue. My mother adjusted Kyle's collar when he returned to them glowing, as though she alone had crafted his success. And then Kyle's gaze swept across the room and landed on me. He blinked, surprised, then gave a short nod as though acknowledging a subordinate. "You are here." "Good. Do what you were told." His expression said everything he didn't say aloud. The ceremony began with applause as Academy officials walked onto the stage. The chief made a brief speech praising the recruits. An assistant commander introduced the candidates one by one, showing slides of their progress. The projector flickered a few times, an issue no one seemed concerned about, and I felt the blood rush to my fingertips. This was the moment I had planned for. When the slideshow paused for a technical readjustment, I rose from my seat, calm, silent, invisible amid the shifting audience. I walked to the side aisle and approached the volunteer manning the tech table. He was a young guy, early 20s, sweating nervously as he tried to troubleshoot the glitch. "Sorry, ma'am," he whispered. "Something's wrong with the file." I leaned close, keeping my voice low and steady. "I have the corrected version of the slideshow. The Academy requested it last night." He blinked, relieved. "Thank God. Can you plug it in?" The tiny moment of trust struck me as almost poetic. I handed him the USB. He slid it into the laptop. The projector flickered. The screen glowed brightly, and everything changed. At first, the original photos appeared as expected. Recruits training, posing, running drills. People clapped politely. Then the next slide loaded, and the entire room fell silent before the audience even understood why. My father frowned. Kyle's smile froze. My mother leaned forward, slightly confused, because on the screen was a photo taken by Linda the night they threw me out. Me standing on the porch in the rain suitcase at my feet, my father's handprint still blazing across my cheek. The timestamp in the corner confirmed authenticity. A murmur rippled through the room like a wave. Confusion, shock, whispered questions. The next slide appeared, a screenshot of a text message from Kyle. "You owe us. Get the money or don't bother coming back." The room gasped. Heads turned toward Kyle, toward my parents, toward me. I did not move. I simply watched. The next slide. A bank transfer history showing years of payments from me to Kyle for his fees, living expenses, and debts. Audience members exchanged looks of disbelief. The next slide. An audio clip played through the speakers. My father's voice clear as day. "She owes it to this family. Kyle comes first. She needs to stop complaining and pay what's expected." My mother's voice responded in the background. "If she doesn't want to help, then she can leave. Kyle deserves everything she doesn't." The room tightened, the air contracting around a collective intake of breath. Someone shouted from the back, "Is this real?" Another voice followed. "Who talks to their daughter like that?" My mother stood abruptly, shaking her head. "This is taken out of context. This is manipulated." My father grabbed her arm to steady her, his face turning red. Kyle stepped forward, raising his hands as if commanding the crowd. "Okay, everyone, calm down. This is family stuff. It's not for this." But then the next slide loaded, a scanned document from the Firefighter Academy's tuition forms, my name signed in the guarantor box. Only not by me. The signature was close, but not perfect. A forgery. Gasps broke into low shouts. One of the Academy staff on stage leaned toward the screen, whispering urgently to another official. Someone else snapped a photo of the projection. I could feel the shift in the room, the turning of the tide. Kyle's voice cracked when he tried again. "She's lying. She's doing this to ruin me." Someone near the front stood up and said, "Or maybe she's showing who you really are." The final slide appeared, a simple line of text on a black background. "This is what they demanded from me. This is what they built with my silence. This is what they hid. The truth is no longer theirs to control." My father roared, suddenly pointing at me. "You did this. You pathetic, ungrateful." He didn't finish. An Academy officer stepped between him and the aisle where I stood. "Sir, you need to sit down." My mother collapsed into her chair, sobbing loudly, repeating the same phrase again and again. "This isn't fair. This isn't fair." Kyle attempted one last feeble protest, but the room had turned completely. He looked around and saw only judgment, disgust, disappointment. He had lost. All of them had, and I had not lifted a finger. I simply allowed the truth to breathe. The auditorium unraveled faster than I expected, as if one crack in the facade of my family had triggered an entire collapse. The audience moments ago, cheerful and celebratory, now buzzed with outrage and disbelief. Parents whispered to each other, instructors muttered under their breath, and several recruits looked away from Kyle as though standing near him might taint their own reputations. My father tried to push past the academy officer blocking him, but the man stood firm, his voice calm, yet immovable. "Sir, you need to return to your seat. Now." My father, who had never once been denied authority in his own home, froze in disbelief. He stared at the officer like he had just been insulted by someone beneath him. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded. The officer didn't blink. "Someone who needs to sit." My mother grabbed my father's sleeve, pulling him back down with trembling fingers. Her mascara streaked across her cheeks, leaving dark trails that matched the chaos building around her. Kyle stood near the front, his face draining to a chalky white. His hands shook as he tried to gather the papers he had brought to show off, as though rearranging them could somehow piece together the reputation that had shattered moments ago. A woman in the second row turned around and glared at him. "You forged your sister's signature," she asked, her voice thick with disgust. Kyle swallowed hard. "That was blown out of proportion," he stammered. "We are family. Families help each other." Another parent chimed in. "Families do not bury their daughters to lift their sons." Kyle's jaw clenched, but no words followed. The academy chief stepped onto the stage, raising a hand to calm the restless auditorium. "We will take a short recess while we verify what has just been presented." His tone was professional, but the tension in his shoulders revealed how deeply this disruption disturbed him. He gestured toward two officials. "Please escort candidate Kyle Harper to the administrative office for immediate review." The silence that followed was suffocating. Kyle blinked, frozen. "No, you can't do that. This is my ceremony. This is protocol," the chief interrupted. "We need to address allegations of fraud and misconduct." Two officials approached Kyle. He took a step back, shaking his head. My father stood again. "This is a misunderstanding. This is personal. You cannot drag my son out like a criminal." The chief gave him a steady look. "Sir, sit down before you become part of this report." The room erupted into hushed murmurs. Kyle's eyes darted toward me, wild and pleading. "Fix this," he hissed. "Tell them it's exaggerated. Tell them it was a joke. Tell them something." I met his stare with complete stillness. "You made your choices. Now they're yours alone." His mouth fell open slightly, as though he truly believed I owed him my silence. The officials guided him toward the back exit. He didn't resist physically, but his voice cracked into a sharp plea. "Mom, Dad, don't let them do this." My mother reached toward him helplessly, but my father held her back as though he finally understood that any outburst now would only deepen the damage. The doors closed behind Kyle. The chief addressed the audience again. "We apologize for the disruption. We will resume shortly. Please remain seated." People did not remain seated. Clusters of relatives broke into pockets of conversation, some whispering angrily about what they'd seen, others gesturing toward my parents with pointed disgust. A few even approached me hesitantly. One older woman touched my arm. "Honey, I am so sorry. No one deserves what you went through." Another parent shook his head. "They should be ashamed, truly ashamed." I nodded politely but did not speak. I didn't need to. The truth was doing the talking for me. My mother abruptly stood and rushed toward me, her voice strangled by high-pitched hysteria. "Why would you do this?" she cried. "Why here? Why today? You ruined your brother's future." She grabbed my wrist, desperation trembling through her fingertips. I pulled my arm free gently but firmly. "I didn't ruin anything. I revealed what already existed." She blinked rapidly, tears streaming, her mascara smearing further. "We can fix this," she whispered. "Delete the video. Take back what you said. Tell them you staged it. Please. Your brother worked so hard. He deserves—" I stopped her with a level look. He deserved the truth catching up to him. Her expression crumpled entirely. Behind her, my father approached more slowly. his face a mask of fury held together by thin social restraint. "You vindictive girl," he growled quietly. "You think this makes you strong? This makes you pathetic." I stepped closer, my voice steady. "What made me pathetic was letting you treat me like property. What makes me strong is ending it." His jaw worked like he wanted to shout, but even he sensed the dozens of watching eyes. For the first time, he found himself contained by the very public opinion he had always weaponized. He stepped back. My mother covered her face, sobbing harder. A voice crackled through the auditorium speakers calling for a 20-minute recess. People began filing out to the lobby for air. I remained seated, observing the shift. My parents stood together near the aisle, their bodies close in a way that suggested fear more than unity. Kyle's absence was a gaping hole in their confidence. Without him to shield everything they did, they seemed smaller, exposed, breakable. My phone buzzed. It was a text from the Academy's administrative office. "We need the original copies of your documentation for verification. Can you come to the office?" I stood. My mother grabbed my sleeve one more time. "Please." "He will lose everything," my father added bitterly. "You wanted revenge. You got it. Isn't that enough?" I met their eyes one at a time. "No, what I wanted was accountability, and this is just the beginning." I walked away before they could respond. The hallway outside the main auditorium was cooler, quieter, lined with plaques honoring past graduates. At the end of the hall, a door labeled Administrative Office stood slightly open. I pushed it gently and stepped inside. Kyle sat in a chair across from a stern-faced administrator, his eyes red and furious. When he saw me, he rose halfway out of the seat. "You are dead to us," he spat. The administrator held up a hand. "Sit." Kyle dropped into the chair. I handed the USB and backup documents to the administrator, who accepted them with professional calm. "Thank you, Miss Harper. We will verify." I nodded. When I stepped back into the hallway, the weight of everything began to settle. Not regret, not satisfaction, just consequence unfolding exactly as it should. I walked out of the administrative hallway with a strange, steady calm humming beneath my ribs, the kind that settles in when a storm has gathered for years and finally begins to break in the direction it was always meant to. The auditorium lights had dimmed during the recess, and groups of people lingered in the lobby, whispering, glancing at my parents with expressions that ranged from disgust to disbelief. It was surreal watching the people who had once held such unwavering control now shrink under a spotlight they could not escape. As I stepped outside for air, the breeze carried the faint scent of cut grass and warm asphalt grounding me. It would have been easy to stop here, easy to tell myself that exposing them publicly was enough. But enough was not what they taught me. They taught me endurance. They taught me to carry more than my share. They taught me obedience. And now I would show them what that training looked like when redirected toward justice. That afternoon after the ceremony was officially canceled and families dispersed in a fog of confusion. I returned to my room and opened my laptop. The evidence folder gleamed at me like an open door. I selected every file related to Kyle's forged documents, unauthorized tuition forms, and financial manipulation. Then I composed an email to the Fire Academy's Integrity Review Committee attaching everything. I included a concise timeline, the forged signature comparison, and screenshots of Kyle's messages admitting he expected me to pay for him. I concluded with a simple statement: I request a full review of candidate Harper's conduct. This documentation reflects a pattern of fraud and coercion. I clicked send. The final blow had begun. But I was not finished. Next, I drafted packets for the State Credit Bureau, the Student Financial Aid Commission, and the bank where my parents had submitted forms in my name. Each packet contained copies of the forged documents with highlighted inconsistencies, my notarized affidavit, and supporting screenshots. Fraud, when presented factually, did not need dramatic language. It was devastating on its own. I mailed the packets at the nearest post office, slipping them one by one into the steel drop box. The metallic thunks echoed like small explosions in the quiet lobby. As the final packet disappeared, I exhaled deeply. It felt like releasing years of weight into the world and letting the system carry it forward. That week unfolded with a slow, precise rhythm. First came a call from the fire academy. An official informed me they were suspending Kyle from all training activities pending investigation. His access badge was disabled. His instructors were notified. His candidacy was now at risk. Then came an email from the Financial Aid Commission confirming they had opened a fraud inquiry based on my submitted evidence. Next came a certified letter from the bank acknowledging they were cross-checking signatures and account activity, and if the forgery was verified, legal action would be taken. Every step tightened the net around them. Every action exposed another layer of what they had tried to hide. Kyle attempted to call me several times, but I let his calls go unanswered. Eventually, the voicemails began. At first, he yelled, calling me dramatic and vindictive. Then he pleaded, insisting his whole future was on the line and that I was overreacting. Then he shifted back to threats. "You are ruining my life. I hope you are proud." But the more he spoke, the more obvious it became that he still believed none of this was his fault, that he still expected me to carry his weight even now. I saved every voicemail. My parents, meanwhile, tried to pretend nothing was happening. My mother sent short, frantic texts asking me to meet and talk this out like adults, followed by manipulative lines about how Kyle was so stressed he could collapse. My father tried a different tactic, sending a single message that read, "If you stop this now, we can fix it. If you don't, you'll regret it." Threat disguised as advice. I did not respond. The truth required no negotiation. Late one evening, just before sunset, a message arrived from the Fire Academy's chief. It was brief, formal, final. Effective immediately, candidate Kyle Harper is dismissed from the Charlotte Fire Academy due to confirmed misconduct, including falsified documents and misrepresentation of financial sponsorship. I read the line twice, not in triumph, but in clarity. This was not victory. This was consequence. The next morning, I received a call from the bank's fraud department. They had verified the forged signature and confirmed my identity had been used in multiple unauthorized applications. The representative spoke calmly, outlining next steps, including formal charges being filed. "If you choose to press charges, we can proceed." I hesitated, not because I doubted what to do, but because the moment felt heavier than expected. "Press them," I said. "Every single one." When I hung up, I stared at the wall for a long moment. The truth was a living force now moving through systems that no longer belonged to my parents or to Kyle. They could not twist it. They could not bury it. They could not shout it down. It was out of their hands completely. And for the first time, I felt something almost like release. That afternoon, I walked through a quiet park near my apartment. Children played on the swings, their delighted screams carrying through the warm air. A couple sat on a bench eating ice cream. A jogger ran past with headphones in. Life flowed around me naturally, undisturbed by the storm unfolding elsewhere. I sat on a bench, sunlight warming my shoulders, and allowed myself a small smile. Not of joy, not of revenge, but of reclaiming something I never thought I would get back. My agency, my voice, my truth. As the sun dipped low, my phone buzzed. A new text from Kyle. This one different. Broken. "They're talking about charging Mom and Dad. Please, don't let them do this." I inhaled slowly, exhaled, typed one sentence. "You made this bed. Now lie in it." Then I blocked the number. That was the final blow. Not the exposure, not the investigation, not the dismissal. The final blow was choosing myself over their chaos for the first time in my life. They showed up on a Sunday afternoon, the kind of day when the world feels too quiet, too still, as if even the air is holding its breath. I had just finished cleaning my small kitchen and was steeping tea when a soft, frantic knock rattled the door. Not the sharp, authoritative kind my father used to assert dominance, but a desperate, uneven tapping that carried fear in every stuttering beat. I knew before I opened it. Something in the heaviness of the moment told me who was on the other side. When I pulled the door open, the sight of them hit me harder than any slap ever had. My mother stood in front, hunched as if someone had removed the bones from her spine. Her face was pale and blotchy, her mascara smudged from either tears or exhaustion. Behind her was my father, his posture slumped, shoulders rounded, the fire that once filled his voice extinguished into something hollow. And inside the car at the curb, Kyle sat in the back seat staring at the dashboard like a child waiting for the verdict of a punishment he finally understood was real. My mother's voice cracked the moment she saw me. "Please, can we come inside?" The instinctive answer rose in my throat. "No, not again. Not ever." But something deeper, colder, stronger whispered back. "Let them speak. Let them face the consequences they built." I stepped aside. They entered cautiously, as though my small apartment were a courtroom where judgment would be passed. In many ways, it was. My mother sank onto the couch without waiting to be invited. My father remained standing, his hands shoved awkwardly into his pockets, his gaze fixed on a stain on the carpet, as if staring at it long enough would turn back time. The silence stretched. It wasn't peaceful. It was suffocating. My mother finally whispered, "We lost everything." She choked on the words. "The academy dismissed Kyle permanently. The bank froze our accounts until the investigation finishes. We might lose the house." My father added quietly, "We already got the letter. Foreclosure is likely." I watched them with a strange detachment, the same way I had watched the evidence pile up on my laptop. Not with joy, not with sympathy, just with clarity. And why I asked softly, "Are you telling me?" My mother looked up, tears sliding across her cheeks. "Because we don't know what else to do." My father lifted his eyes at last, and for the first time in my life, they were not full of anger or expectation. They were full of fear. "We need help." A humorless, almost painful laugh escaped me. "Help!" The word tasted poisonous coming from them. "Help," I repeated. "You threw me out into the rain. You forged my name. You used me until I had nothing left, and now you want help." My father stepped forward, trying to reclaim some trace of his old authority. "You exposed us publicly. You made us look like monsters." "You are monsters," I said calmly. "You just finally ran out of shadows to hide in." My mother flinched as though the words struck her physically. I let the silence settle again. It didn't feel awkward. It felt necessary. My mother then reached out, grabbing my hand with trembling fingers. "We were wrong," she whispered. "We shouldn't have treated you the way we did. We were scared. Kyle always needed more, and we thought—" "Thought what?" I interrupted, pulling my hand away. "That I didn't deserve anything, that my only purpose was to sacrifice so he could be comfortable." She covered her face, sobs shaking her shoulders. My father stared at me, his voice strained. "We're asking for another chance. Families, rebuild. We can fix this." His attempt at a calm tone cracked halfway through. I stepped closer, forcing him to meet my eyes. "The night you hit me, you said I was an embarrassment. You said Kyle came first. You told me I owed this family everything." He swallowed hard, unable to deny it. "And now I asked. Now that the world sees what you hid. Now that consequences finally found you." My father's shoulders dropped completely. "We have nowhere else to go." My mother looked up, eyes red, voice trembling. "Please, you're still our daughter." The word daughter made something inside me twist with a sting so sharp it nearly took my breath. Daughter, when they needed something. Never any other time. I walked to the window and looked outside at Kyle sitting in the car, staring blankly, his once inflated ego deflated to scraps. That was the boy they chose over me every single time. That was the son they sacrificed everything to protect. And now they wanted me to save them from his downfall. I turned back toward them, inhaling deeply. "I'm going to say this once," I began, my voice steady as steel. "I don't hate you. I don't wish suffering on you. But I will never, ever save you from the consequences you created." My mother began to cry again, harder this time. My father's mouth opened as though he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. "You chose him over me every time I continued. You didn't just fail me. You betrayed me. And betrayal has a price." My father's jaw tightened, but it was not anger anymore. It was despair. "So what now?" he asked. We're just done. I nodded slowly. Yes. My mother's breath caught in her throat. She reached for me again, but I stepped back. You threw me out that night because you said I wasn't useful to him anymore, I said. And now, you come to me because you finally see the truth. I was never your daughter. I was your resource. The words hung in the air like a verdict. Heavy. Final. I walked to the door and opened it. My mother trembled as she stood. My father lingered for a moment, looking at me not with authority, but with something like regret. Maybe even shame. We really have lost you, he murmured. You never had me, I replied. You had my fear. Now that it's gone, you have nothing. They stepped outside slowly, as if their legs had forgotten how to support them. My mother wept silently as she walked toward the car. My father's expression was hollow. Kyle didn't look at me as they drove away. He didn't need to. He already knew. The door clicked shut behind me, soft and definitive. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. Life after they left my doorway that day did not transform overnight. Healing was not a cinematic montage of candles, yoga classes, and instant peace. It was quieter than that, steadier. I rebuilt myself the same way someone restores a house damaged over years of storms piece by piece, starting with the foundation everyone else had neglected. My foundation began with something simple: routine. I woke early, not because I had to, but because the morning silence felt like ownership. I brewed coffee in my tiny kitchen, the smell filling the apartment like a promise. I stopped checking my phone out of fear. I worked full shifts at the community center where I had recently been promoted to program coordinator. The promotion came unexpectedly slipping into my hands like a second chance I had not asked for but desperately needed. You're dependable, my supervisor had said. And you listen. People trust you. I remember standing there stunned because no one in my family had ever used those words about me without including a demand afterward. Dependable had always meant useful. Now it meant capable. I embraced the new position with a focus I had not realized I possessed. I organized after-school programs, handled budgets, coordinated volunteers, and even led workshops. My coworkers began inviting me to lunch instead of treating me as the quiet person in the corner. I was building something real, and it was mine. Every evening after work, I returned to an apartment that, while small, was entirely peaceful. No slamming doors, no raised voices, no demands. I hung thrifted art on the walls. I bought a secondhand bookshelf and filled it with novels I had never had time to read. I added a small plant that leaned toward the light in a way that mirrored something in me. Growth is quiet but relentless. I started cooking meals for myself. At first, it felt strange standing in my kitchen without hearing my mother's voice telling me what I was doing wrong. But soon, I began to enjoy the process. The sound of sizzling vegetables, the rhythm of slicing onions, the smell of garlic warming the air. These were small things, but they grounded me. I started sleeping better. Not perfectly, trauma has a way of echoing in dreams, but deeply enough that my body finally began to recover. On weekends, I walked to the park and read on a bench near the lake. Children ran across the grass. Dogs chased sticks and joggers passed with steady breaths. Life unfolded around me without my having to brace for impact. One Saturday in early autumn, I passed a used car parked in a driveway with a for sale sign taped to the windshield. A silver sedan, old but well-maintained, affordable, practical, freedom on four wheels. I stood there staring at it longer than I should have, my mind filled with flashes of the past. My father mocking me whenever I mentioned wanting my own transportation. Kyle insisting he should get the better car because she doesn't have anywhere important to go. I pulled out my phone and called the number on the sign. By the end of the week, the car was mine. I ran my hand across the steering wheel the first night it sat in my lot, feeling something shift inside me. Not pride exactly, more like self-recognition. For the first time, I wasn't relying on borrowed anything. Everything around me was mine, because I had created it, not because someone forced it into my hands with conditions. Driving felt like a revelation. The road stretched ahead in a way that made the future feel bigger, wider, less terrifying. I turned up the radio and let the wind rush through the cracked window. I felt alive, safe. Unclaimed. Linda, my neighbor, became a constant presence in my life. She baked cookies on Sundays and left half a batch at my door with notes that said things like, "You deserve sweetness," or "You're doing beautifully." Sometimes I knocked on her door to check in, and we'd drink tea together while she told stories about her late husband and the life they built. She reminded me of the kind of love I had never received at home, gentle, patient, steady. Over time, I allowed myself to laugh again. Real laughter. Not the strained kind used to keep peace at the dinner table. I found joy in small things. Warm sunlight, clean laundry, a perfectly brewed cup of tea, a kind word from a coworker, my own reflection looking less tired in the mirror. Meanwhile, the fallout from my family's collapse continued quietly in the background like a distant storm you know will never reach you again. I heard through a cousin that my parents had moved into a cramped apartment after losing the house. Kyle had taken a job stocking shelves at a hardware store while waiting to hear whether additional legal action would be taken. Their spiral did not bring me satisfaction, but it did bring closure, because for once the universe aligned their consequences with their choices. I didn't need to check in. I didn't stalk their social media. I didn't revisit the evidence folder unless an investigator contacted me, which happened twice more both times, ending with a quick confirmation that my documentation had been vital. I wasn't caught in their orbit anymore. I was finally living as someone separate, whole, and capable. In the early evenings, I often stepped onto my small balcony and watched the sun set over the rooftops. The sky shifted from gold to pink to deep purple. The wind moved through the leaves like a soft, distant applause. I thought a lot about who I had been. The girl who looked for validation in people incapable of giving it. The girl who believed she was only valuable when sacrificing for others. The girl who stayed obedient even when obedience was killing her spirit. And then I thought about who I was becoming. The woman who rebuilt her life on truth rather than permission. The woman who learned boundaries not from books but from surviving people who hated them. The woman who stopped waiting for apologies and started giving herself answers. Healing didn't mean forgetting them. It meant outgrowing them. One evening, as I sat with my tea on the balcony, the breeze warm against my skin, I whispered something I had never allowed myself to say aloud before. "I'm proud of you. Not proud of the revenge. Not proud of the exposure. Proud that I survived. Proud that I walked away. Proud that I rebuilt. Proud that I lived." In that moment, for the first time in my entire life, I felt genuinely free. It happened on a Wednesday evening, the kind of midweek lull where everything feels predictable and steady. I had just finished dinner and was settling onto the couch with a book when my phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen, casually expecting a reminder from work or a message from Linda. Instead, the name flashing across the screen froze me in place. Kyle. For a moment, I simply stared at it, my heartbeat slowing instead of quickening. Months had passed since I blocked him, but he must have gotten a new number. The audacity arrived before I even opened the message. The first line appeared in the preview, "We need help." Of course they did. Of course he reached out now after everything had collapsed around them. I debated ignoring it entirely, but curiosity tugged at me. Not compassion, not weakness, just curiosity. I opened the message. "We need help. Mom is sick from stress. Dad is drinking too much. They might get sued. I lost my job. I'm barely keeping up with rent. Please. We're family." I felt nothing at first. No anger, no sadness, no satisfaction. Just a quiet, steady awareness of who he really was. The tone felt familiar, dripping entitlement wrapped in desperation. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't acknowledging what he had done. He was simply listing his troubles like a bill he expected me to pay. He continued, "You have a good job now. I know you do. I heard you got promoted. You can help us get through this. You always helped before." I set the phone down gently, almost laughing at the absurdity. You always helped before. That was the problem. I walked to the kitchen to refill my water, letting the cold calm wash through me. When I returned, another message waited. "I know you're mad, but come on. It wasn't that serious. Families do things for each other. You're making this bigger than it is." The words hit me with an eerie familiarity. My father's voice echoed through them. My mother's guilt-laden tone sat between the lines. The cycle was trying to pull me back in, but the door they once pushed me through had become a permanent boundary. I typed a short reply. "What exactly do you want?" He answered, within seconds the speed of someone confident he'd worn me down. 500 to start. Just until I get back on my feet. Then maybe you can talk to the investigators and say you overreacted so they can lighten up. If they think you forgive us, maybe they'll go easier. I read the message twice. 500 to start, as though this were a normal transaction, as though my trauma were something I could reverse like a spilled glass of water, as though consequences dissolved at the first sign of inconvenience. He sent another message when I didn't reply quickly enough. "Please, don't be selfish. We're all in this mess together." That line pulled a cold, humorless laugh from my chest. Together, they never considered me part of anything unless they needed something. When they threw me into the rain, we weren't a family then. When Kyle forged my signature, we weren't together then. When they humiliated me publicly at the dinner table, no one cared about togetherness. That word had always been their leash, and I had cut it. I typed slowly, choosing every word with intention. "We are not in anything together." Before I could press send, another bubble appeared. "I know you think exposing us made you stronger, but it just made you bitter. Help us fix this. That's what families do." I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the weight of his delusion sit in the air. "Help us fix this," as if repairing their lives required my hands, as if their destruction was my burden, as if they had not been the architects of their own collapse. I pressed send. His response was almost immediate. "Wow, you're really doing this. After everything we did for you." The phrasing was so manipulative it almost felt comical. I typed the reply slowly, calmly, intentionally. "What you did for me. You threw me out. You used me. You lied. You forged my name. You drained me financially. You humiliated me. And you expected me to keep giving. That wasn't love. That wasn't family. That was exploitation." The typing bubble appeared again, instantly trembling with urgency. "Fine. If you want to be petty, then forget it. Don't help. But when Mom and Dad lose the apartment, that'll be on you. When I end up homeless, that's on you. Remember that." There it was, the final card he had always relied on. Guilt. A weapon wielded so casually, so confidently, he believed it could still cut through me. But guilt only works on someone who still feels responsible. I felt responsible for myself now. Only myself. Their situation, I wrote, is the result of their choices, not mine. "Your situation is the result of your choices, not mine. Accountability is not cruelty." He sent one last message before I blocked the number again. A single line meant to wound me. "You're dead to us." I stared at the screen, realizing how little the words carried now. "I was dead to you the moment I stopped being useful." I whispered to the empty room. I blocked the number. The silence that followed was not oppressive. It was liberating. I stepped out onto my balcony, breathing in the cool night air. The lights of the city shimmered in gentle patterns below, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked. Life moved on, and so did I. I leaned against the railing and let the breeze brush over my skin. The past had tried to grab hold of me again. It always would. But now I had armor made of truth boundaries forged from survival and a life constructed with my own hands. Kyle's audacity had not shaken my new world. It had confirmed it. I wasn't afraid of them anymore. I wasn't owned by them anymore. And I was no longer the daughter who carried the weight of a family that never carried me. Their decline unfolded the way structures collapse when the foundation rots from the inside. Not suddenly, not violently, but steadily, predictably in a rhythm that matched every choice they had made. I did not witness most of it firsthand. I didn't need to. The updates came in fragments from distant relatives, from social media posts they forgot to lock down, from the occasional overheard comment in the grocery store, and from the quiet whispers of the small town that once saw them as a respectable family. The first sign of their unraveling came 2 weeks after Kyle's audacity-filled plea. A cousin messaged me out of the blue. "Did you hear your parents moved out of the house?" I froze for a moment before replying. "No." "What happened?" "Foreclosure," she typed back. "Bank took it. Papers were posted on the door." I sat back in my chair, letting the news settle like a stone, dropping into deep water. Losing the house wasn't just a financial blow. It was symbolic. That house had been their throne. The stage where their favoritism played out. The place where my father strutted around as though his word shaped reality. Now someone else would live in those rooms. Someone else would stand at that stove, sit in that living room, sleep behind the door they once locked behind me. And my family would no longer belong there. My cousin added, "I heard they're renting a small 2-bedroom out near the edge of town." Rough place. Cheap. I thanked her for telling me and closed the chat. I felt no joy, no regret, just inevitability. Actions lead somewhere. Their actions led here. Kyle's spiral came next. A coworker at the community center recognized him one afternoon while we were sorting supply boxes. She nudged me gently. "I saw someone who looked just like you earlier," she said, "at the hardware store down on Maple." I hesitated. "Did he seem okay?" She shook her head. "He looked rough, like someone who hasn't slept in days." He was yelling at his manager in the parking lot. I nodded slowly. Kyle had always been fragile beneath the ego. The moment the world stopped applauding him, he cracked. Later that evening, I checked social media out of curiosity. Kyle's profile was still public. His most recent post read, "People will betray you when you least expect it." The comments were filled with friends saying generic supportive things, but a few asked what he had done. He didn't reply. The silence spoke louder than anything. Meanwhile, my parents were aging faster than I remembered them. A distant aunt posted a photo from a family gathering. My mother was in the background, thinner, her expression hollow. My father's shoulders, once squared with forced authority, were slumped. Someone tagged them in a post asking for prayer for family troubles. I scrolled past it feeling detached. They were finally living without a scapegoat, without someone to blame, without the comfort of taking my effort and calling it theirs. Word from the community around them trickled in gradually. The neighbor who once admired my father refused to greet him now. The church group my mother used to boast about withdrew invitations politely but firmly. Not out of cruelty, out of recognition. People had seen the presentation. They had heard the audio. They had watched the truth play out on a screen too large to ignore. The facade was shattered, and reputations once broken do not glue back together. Bills continued piling up for them. With their accounts frozen during the investigation, my parents struggled to keep lights on. My mother took a part-time job cleaning offices in the evenings. My father picked up shifts doing deliveries. Kyle floated between short-term jobs, unable to maintain anything consistent, always blaming someone else for why things weren't working out. The world had stopped cushioning him, and he had never learned to stand on his own. There was a particularly sharp update that reached me through Linda. She sat outside her door one evening crocheting while I watered my small balcony plant. "I saw your father in town today," she said gently, not looking up from her yarn. I paused. "Doing what?" "Sitting on a bench outside the old hardware store. Just sitting, head down. Like he was lost." There was no triumph in her voice, only truth. "He looked like a man who finally understands that shouting doesn't build anything," she added. I nodded slowly, unsure what to feel. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything. The investigation into the forged documents eventually concluded. I received a formal letter stating that charges were being filed. Not jail time charges. White-collar crimes rarely work that way, but financial penalties, mandatory restitution, and a legal mark on both Kyle and my father that would follow them for years. Actions. Consequences. My mother reached out twice more before disappearing from my life completely. Her messages were short and brittle. "Please, think about helping us. Even a little." And later, "We are drowning." I never replied, not out of cruelty, out of boundaries, out of survival. Meanwhile, Kyle continued slipping. A mutual acquaintance from school told me she saw him outside a bar on a Friday night, swaying on his feet, shouting at someone who refused to lend him money. "He's changed," she said. "Looks empty." I thanked her and moved on. I had no intention of stepping back into the chaos they created. My life had moved forward. Theirs had collapsed inward. Reality had turned into an honest mirror. Near the end of autumn, I saw one final sign of their decline. While driving home from work one evening, I spotted them walking along the sidewalk near the bus station. My father's clothes were worn. My mother's hair was pulled back in a sloppy bun. Kyle walked several steps ahead, hands shoved in his pockets, his shoulders heavy with defeat. They did not see me. I did not call out. I watched them cross the street slowly, carefully, like people who had finally learned what it felt like to have nothing solid beneath their feet. As the traffic light changed and I continued driving, I whispered something not filled with anger or bitterness. Just truth. This is what you build. And as I drove home, the fading sunlight cast a warm glow across the road, lighting my path, a reminder that sometimes the fall of others is not your victory. It is simply the space you needed to rise. Peace did not arrive with a dramatic sunrise or a sudden emotional breakthrough. It came softly, like a quiet guest knocking at a door I didn't realize had been closed for years. It came in pieces subtle and steady, warming the cold corners of my life that had never known gentleness. It came from learning that freedom isn't the absence of pain, but the absence of people who keep reopening the wounds. It started one morning months after the fallout, when I woke to the sound of birds outside my window instead of the echo of my father's voice in my mind. I lay there for several minutes listening. No dread, no heaviness, just stillness. I got out of bed, made coffee, and realized my hands weren't trembling anymore. The simple act of existing no longer felt like walking on broken glass. My peace took root in the routines I built, the slow mornings, the quiet evenings, the steady rhythm of a life that no longer demanded I prove my worth at every turn. At the community center, my promotion blossomed into something meaningful. I wasn't just coordinating programs anymore, I was shaping them. I launched an initiative for teenagers struggling with unstable home lives, a group where they learned things no one had taught me: how to set boundaries, how to recognize manipulation, how to find strength in themselves instead of in approval. I watched their confidence grow week by week, and sometimes I caught a flicker of my younger self in their expressions: confused, hopeful, lost, brave. One girl stayed behind after a session one afternoon and asked, "How did you learn all this?" I smiled softly. "The hard way." She nodded like she understood. And maybe she did. Sometimes peace grows when you give others what you needed most. My relationship with Linda deepened more than I expected. She became the kind of constant presence no one in my family had ever been: a steady kindness without demands, a reminder that not all bonds are built from blood. On Sundays, she brought over warm rolls and asked about my week. She'd sit in her soft, worn sweater and listen with a patience that made my chest ache. "You're doing beautifully," she'd say. "You really are." And every time she said it, something healed. In late autumn, I took my first real day off in months. I drove my silver sedan, my little badge of independence, into the mountains just outside Charlotte. The leaves had turned deep shades of gold and crimson, carpeting the road in a mosaic of color. I stopped at an overlook, stepped out of the car, and breathed in the cool, crisp air. The horizon stretched endlessly rolling hills, illuminated by sunlight breaking through the clouds. I felt small in the best way. I had finally created distance from the world that once crushed me. As I stood there, the wind tangling in my hair, I whispered to myself, "You made it." And for the first time, I believed it fully. My peace was not fragile. It was earned. It was solid. It was mine. Meanwhile, the updates about my family grew fewer and farther between. I no longer sought them out, no longer felt the reflexive tightening in my chest when their names appeared in a message or conversation. The last I heard, they were living in a cramped rental on the outskirts of town, scraping by but surviving. Not drowning, not thriving, just living in the life they built with their own hands. Occasionally, someone would ask if I ever thought about reconnecting. I would shake my head calmly. "Closure doesn't require a door to reopen," I'd say, and I meant it. My peace came from letting the story end where it should have ended years ago. One winter evening, while snow drifted gently outside my window, I sat on my balcony wrapped in a thick blanket, a mug of tea warming my hands. The world was silent except for the occasional crunch of tires on the street below. I watched the snow fall, each flake catching the streetlight like tiny sparks. Peace, I realized, was not excitement. It was not revenge. It was not vindication. It was the quiet knowledge that I no longer belonged to people who couldn't love me the way I deserved. The past no longer pulled at me with claws. The memories no longer carried heat. They were simply that memories. What mattered now was the woman I had become. A woman who rebuilt her life from the ground up. A woman who learned to choose herself. A woman who survived. As I finished my tea, a soft smile curved across my lips. I whispered into the cold night air, "You did good." Not because everything was perfect, not because the scars were gone, but because I had finally stepped into a life where I felt whole. A life where peace was not a distant dream, but a daily presence. A life I had claimed with both hands. I stood brushing stray snowflakes from my blanket and glanced once more at the quiet street below. Then, with a sense of finality that settled deep in my bones, I walked inside and closed the balcony door. This time, the click of the lock didn't feel like shutting something out. It felt like keeping something precious in. And for the first time in my entire life, I knew exactly what peace felt like. I want to take a moment to speak directly to you, the person on the other side of the screen, because if you stayed with me through this entire journey, then something in this story touched a part of your own life. Maybe you saw pieces of yourself in the moments where I was pushed aside, overlooked, used, or thrown away. Maybe it reminded you of a time when someone you loved hurt you the most. Maybe you have lived through a night when the people you trusted broke something in you that never quite healed the same way again. And if that is true, then I want you to know something with complete honesty. You are not alone. Stories like this are not just fiction, they are echoes of what so many of us have endured in silence. There are people walking around with smiles that hide the scars left by their own families. There are people who learned to survive on their own because no one ever came when they cried for help. There are people who built entire lives out of the rubble someone else tried to bury them under. If that feels familiar even a little, then I want you to take a deep breath and recognize the strength it took for you to get here. Not just to this video, but to this moment in your life. The fact that you are still standing, still breathing, still trying, still healing, still hoping that someone will see you for who you really are means you carry a strength that many people will never understand. And here is something else I believe with every part of me. Sometimes the family we are born into is not the family that deserves us. Sometimes the people who share our blood are not the ones who share our heart. Sometimes the greatest peace you will ever find comes from choosing yourself, even if it means walking away from the people who should have loved you better. And I know that can feel like the hardest choice in the world, especially for those of us who grew up being told that loyalty means silence, endurance, and sacrifice. But the truth is simpler than all of that. You have the right to leave any place where love is conditional. You have the right to stop carrying people who refuse to walk beside you. You have the right to protect the parts of yourself that others tried to break. You have the right to build a life where you are valued, not used. A life where you are seen, not blamed. A life where you are loved, not tolerated. If this story stirred something inside you, I want you to take a moment and tell me where you are watching from. City, state, or even country. And if you feel comfortable, tell me how this story connected with your life. What part of it made you stop and think? What part made you feel something in your chest? What part reminded you of a moment you survived? Your voice matters here. Your experience matters. Your truth matters. This channel is not just for entertainment. It is a space for people who have lived through the things no one talks about openly. It is a community of people who know what it means to start over, rebuild, and reclaim their identity. And if you want to stay, if you want more stories like this, if you want a place where your strength is recognized, then I would be honored to have you here. New stories will come. Stories about healing, about hidden courage, about the quiet victories that nobody sees. Stories about people who refused to let their past define their future. And maybe one of those stories will be yours. So stay with me a little longer. Share your thoughts. share your pain, share your survival. And if no one has told you today, let me be the first. I am proud of you. You made it this far, and that matters more than you know.